Educational purposes only TikTok. We're going to learn about the Civil War.
Things that are done for educational purposes have to be educational. You know, I really thought that we shouldn't have to cover this topic anymore, and I wasn't even going to make a video about it, but then I just pointed out that basically this entire person's video is bullshit. And they're like, try and correct me. I majored in history, my guy. I know what I'm talking about. Now, anybody can major in something. Getting a degree in it is a different story, and I think there might be a distinction to be made here, but let's see what you have to say.
In the years leading up to the Civil War, the Democrats were what we would today consider to be conservative, and the Republicans were liberals.
Okay, so far so good.
They wanted big government involvement in states' issues, and they supported what we would today call social welfare programs.
And you already lost it. No, the Republicans were socially liberal. They believed slavery should not be expanded to new territories and were abolitionist light at best. There is not a single fucking Republican platform, because you can go back and read it, you know, Miss History Major, that represents anything that would be considered a big government or anything even remotely close to social welfare programs. Not one fucking policy. In fact, protecting states' rights was actually a listed Republican Party platform for the 1860 election. The only big government federal intervention they really were worried about was building the fucking railroad. Just Google the 1860 Republican platform. No new slavery, build a railroad. The only big government shit they were doing. But hey, we all make mistakes. I definitely do in my videos here and there, so maybe that was just a gaffe. Please continue.
The Civil War was not fought over slavery.
Oh my fucking god, yes, it absolutely was fought specifically and solely over slavery. Nothing fucking else. Have you read literally any article of secession? Every single one of them cites slavery as the reason they seceded from the Union. Did you read the Confederate Constitution? It literally spelled out that the institution of slavery is the foundation of the fucking Confederacy. How about the Vice President of the Confederacy, Alexander Stephens' cornerstone speech? The South started the war over slavery. We know this because they fucking told us repeatedly.
Lincoln didn't care about slavery. There were 40 to 50,000 slaves in the North in the years before and during the Civil War.
Wrong a fucking again. First of all, Lincoln didn't start the war. The Confederacy did. When, you know, South Carolina and all those other states seceded, and then South Carolina shot at a federal fort, Fort Sumter. But Lincoln's view on slavery is pretty irrelevant. The Civil War was started and fought over preserving the institution of slavery. And there was not 40 or 50,000 fucking slaves in the North at the start of the Civil War. Like, I think there's like 16 slaves in New Jersey when the Civil War ended. Your 40,000 number is from colonial New England, you know, before the United States existed. By 1804, every northern state had passed legislation to abolish slavery. Now, some of this legislation had gradual implementation, so there's still a few remaining slaves in the North in the lead up to the Civil War, but there hadn't been 40,000 slaves in the North for nearly a century by the time the Civil War started. So what else do you know what you're talking about that you know, need to be corrected on?
The South wanted to be able to abolish any federal law with which they didn't agree. And they started to get in trouble for not following federal law. So they said, let's just form our own country. Then we get to decide what our government can and cannot do and where our tax dollars go.
Literally every single word of that is untrue. Slave states wanted equal voting power to free states. So free states wouldn't have the unilateral power to legislatively abolish slavery. That was the only thing they were fucking concerned about. There was no other big federal laws they were really worried about or rebelling against. So when we started our country to get the slave states on board to, you know, fight the British and form a country, we gave them a ton of compromises in regards to slavery, like the Three-Fifths Compromise, remember that one? The whole 2 senators per state thing regardless of population, and the Missouri Compromise, which dictated that when you added a free state, in this case Maine, it would be paired with a slave state, Missouri. That way there was an equal number of free and slave states, and they had equal power in the Senate, and the North couldn't just abolish slavery. And then Kansas gets added to the Union as a single state, and its residents vote to be a free state. Come on, Miss History Major, does bloody Kansas ring a bell? The border wars, it was kind of a big fucking deal. Remember John Brown's out there beheading people with a fucking broadsword? Also, Kansas enters the Union as a free state. Free states now have the power. South sees the writing on the wall, is like, hey, why don't we just form our own country now? Because eventually they're going to tell us we've got to get rid of our slaves, and we don't want it. That was the reason for the treason.
Lincoln did not care about slavery. It became a political ploy, a bargaining chip for him. He said, listen, End this rebellion, lay down your arms, stop what you're doing, swallow what you're chewing, get your butts back into the Union, start paying your taxes and do what you're told, or I'm going to free your slaves.
This is genuinely the dumbest fucking thing I think I've ever heard. The Emancipation Proclamation was in 1863, 2 fucking years after the Civil War started. It wasn't a bargaining chip. Lincoln had no power to free the Confederacy slaves at that point. He still had to win the fucking war to do that. And by this point, the issue of freeing the slaves was a non-issue. That was fucking happening no matter what, unless the Confederacy won. The Emancipation Proclamation was a rally cry for the North and a way to encourage Southern slaves to escape and come up and fight for the Union. It had nothing to do with discouraging a rebellion 2 years into the bloodiest war in our nation's fucking history.
Lincoln freed the slaves, but he didn't care about them. He didn't go get them. He didn't send the military down to round them up and bring them north to safety and freedom.
What the fuck are you saying? What the fuck do you think he was doing? He freed the slaves with the Emancipation Proclamation, which happened at Gettysburg. You just sat here with your whole fucking chest and insinuated that Lincoln, in the middle of the bloodiest war in our nation's history, thought to himself, you know, it's a perfectly reasonable and logical option for me to just send the military that is currently fighting the Confederacy into the heart of the Confederacy and just take the 4 million people they literally started a war over to keep possession of, people who would most certainly take up arms against the Confederacy and help us win this war. But nah, what we're doing's working fine. It should only take us a couple more years to really wrap this thing up. Like, Jesus fuck, do you understand the idiocy of that fucking statement?
Republicans waged a war to get the Democrats back in the Union and paying taxes.
Oh my god, seriously, you think the North gave a shit about the fucking South's taxes? Pretty much the only way that the federal government collected taxes in the 1850s was through import tariffs. There was no corporate payroll taxes or income taxes or any of the taxes you think about today. Just imported goods from other countries coming through ports. You paid taxes when you brought shit into the country. 63% of all federal taxes collected in that time frame came through the port of New York. And the North is where all the fucking industry was. They were the ones importing shit. The Tariff Act of 1857 was authored, supported, and more favorable to Southerners than it had been in decades. The North's revenue losses from losing the South would have been negligible.
The parties started to switch platforms after the Civil War. They started to switch their policy and what they stand for. Democrats started to become more liberal. They started to want big government involvement in states' issues and things that we would consider to be social welfare programs because they wanted Reconstruction to happen. They wanted the federal government to come down and give them taxpayer dollars to rebuild the South.
No, the party switch didn't start happening until the 1930s, when Northern Democrats, who really didn't make racism a party platform, started passing stuff that was a little bit more favorable to African Americans, and Southern Democrats got the panties in a wad. So racist Southern Democrats, led by Strom Thurmond, started doing some weird party switch stuff where they created the Dixiecrats to try to unseat Harry Truman, and that failed. And then they started voting for Democrats in local elections and Republicans for federal elections to try to get some more power, and that didn't really work out. And then after LBJ, a staunch Southern Democrat, signed the Civil Rights Act in 1968, the racist Southern Democrats were like, fuck it, we're out, and they switched parties. It all got capped off with Richard Nixon's Southern strategy. It had nothing to do with Reconstruction that had happened 100 fucking years earlier. Nothing you have fucking said has any basis in reality. I don't know what online Alabama community college history program you majored in, but I'd ask for a refund, because clearly you don't know what the fuck you're talking about. I'm damn sure not your guy, but you can consider yourself fucking corrected.